missing. What do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, we have hit 6 o'clock. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the City of North Kansas City's special meeting, May 25th. Eric, or do we have to? No, we don't need a roll call tonight. I got approval of the agenda as number 4. We'll go that route. Approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So
move to approve. Okay. Second.
Second.
I don't know which one I landed on.
I don't see Crystal. Anyone?
I'm serving as
anyone dissent from approving the agenda? There. Oh. Go ahead, Eric.
I'm serving. Yes, it says yes, sir. I'm serving as deputy city clerk tonight. Tonight's special meeting. Earlier this year, the city council expressed interest in having a broad discussion about development in North Kansas City. On March 2nd, an overview of the city's master plan was presented. On March 16th, the city's development process, economic development tools, and economic development incentive policy were discussed. And tonight's date was established for a virtual special council meeting to discuss the city's development process and goals. Residents, business owners, and visitors were invited to provide feedback on the city's development in advance of this meeting. Public comment will not be taken at this special council meeting as it was taken in advance. On April 7th, the city council approved a questionnaire incorporating input that was provided by council. So the public comment was solicited in advance through the use of postcards that were sent to every residence and business in the city, the use of the city's media channels, including the city newsletter, which is also mailed to every household. So at this time, staff looks forward to discussing the city's development goals and process with the city council, trying to answer any questions you may have, and we turn it over to you for your discussion.
All right, thank you. Who's up? Jesse, Councilmember Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll bat lead off here. I want to start the meeting by saying I do appreciate the folks who did take the time to respond. I would imagine that you are also the people watching this meeting because you're engaged members of our community. With that being said, the survey is simply not going to be valuable as a representative sample of our city. The response rate was 0.5%, 0.5% of the potential survey respondents. Of those 29 we received, 2 were from council members who are present tonight, and another 7 or 8 were mostly blank. So there's just so little information to go on here. Next thing was that 80% of the respondents were homeowners. So it's thoroughly not surprising to hear people in favor of home ownership who are homeowners themselves. And one was listed as a cat. So I'm not sure what that was. Let's see. So a couple things that I did take away from the survey and not approaching this as necessarily representative of the sentiments of the entire city, but a couple ideas that came out. One mentioned there was a recurring theme of preserving neighborhood character, preserving the character of the city. And one thing that came up was the zoning for single family zoned portions of the neighborhood to, I don't know if it's maintain the architectural style of the neighborhood so that somebody couldn't come in, tear a house down. You know, as values rise, we may be seeing more of that where an older home gets torn down and rebuilt. There's an example that I believe was pointed to. It's on 23rd or 24th Avenue. It's a large sheet metal sided house. I'm not here to comment on the architectural style myself. I'm indifferent to it, but it certainly doesn't fit with the neighborhood. So whether or not we could put something in the code that would at least give some sort of architectural review before a new home is built to prevent things like that, where there's just one that doesn't make any sense in the neighborhood. Again, not a critique of that design. It just isn't congruent. And then the other part was we've got, and I believe this is something Councilman Graves has talked about a number of times. There are a lot of single family conversions to multifamily in the residential zone. And I don't have exact counts on how many of those are in the R1 zone, which should not have been permitted to happen. I don't know how many were grandfathered or how many were just done without a permit, but I would like to see something happen that we could reel that back in, where if something is going to be multifamily, it needs to be in the multifamily zone. If something's going to be single family, it needs to be in the single family zone. And what we can as a city do about that to prevent more from happening and to reverse or check up on the ones that were done without permission. And then the last piece, and this is something I would put back to respondents, is the recurring theme in the respondents of home ownership. My question to that is how do we do it? If we're truly, as a city, looking to increase home ownership rates, what do we do to make that happen? Because we can't dictate private land development necessarily. We can't tell somebody what to do with their private property unless we, change zoning around, and that could become pretty restrictive. And then we're not a land rich city. We don't have a lot more parcels to build out, to put out for bid. And so at this point, if people truly want to see home ownership increase, how does that happen? And I'd be open to council thoughts on that.
All right. I saw Councilmember Graves. Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate Councilmember Smith's comments on that. And I agree with about 95% of what was just said. And just real quick, one thing I probably wouldn't agree with is restricting what is built on lots, as long as they comply with setback requirements and zoning requirements. One thing I actually like about North Kansas City, I guess this excludes Northgate Village, but over in wards 1 and 3 and 4, houses are not uniform. Like each house looks different. And to me, I like that aspect of North Kansas City. I don't want to get into a situation where we're like an HOA process where your neighbors have to approve of the style of your home. There might be a situation where your neighbor builds a house that you don't like, and that's just part of the deal living in North Kansas City. Our houses down here are unique, and I happen to like that. As far as increasing home ownership, I have a tremendous amount of ideas on that, and I've been working toward getting rid of one. Okay, so let me go back. Property values right now are increasing, as we all know. And one advantage of that is a lot of the people that own rental property that are, let's just say, not the greatest quality of houses are suddenly worth a lot of money. And a lot of those people are cashing out, and those houses are transitioning from rental property to owner occupant property. And I think we've all noticed, especially in the avenues, otherwise known as Ward 3, a lot of these houses are getting fixed up right now. One concern I have is I recently sold a property that probably should have been torn down. It should have been bulldozed, and it's not being bulldozed because all these old houses are grandfathered in. And so if you take an old house that has the foundation's 100 years old, it's in horrible condition, if you tear that property down, when you rebuild it, you have to meet current code requirements and setback requirements. And so some of these bungalows that are super close to the street are not, if you rebuild that same house on the same lot, once you push it back 20 feet off the street and set it back 20 feet off the back line, and then I think it's 5 feet on each side, there's like no space to build a new house there, which is why the house that you were referring to that has like the corrugated steel exterior, they're going to have to start building like narrow in the avenues. They're going to be like tall, narrow buildings. They have to build up to meet setback requirements, or else you can only build something that's like 700 square feet. So I don't know if we can look at perhaps amending or easing or relaxing setback requirements or parking variances, because I know that they require a certain amount of parking space for the house nowadays, and they have to be a certain distance off the street to encourage people to actually build on those lots. And furthermore, I agree that we have a lot of properties that are zoned single family that are being used multifamily. And to me, it's also a health and safety issue. I see a lot of properties that do not have egress and are not, the electrical's not run for multifamily, the plumbing's not run for multifamily, etc. And I'm all ears if you have plans on how to remedy that. And furthermore, we do actually have, there are lots available here in Northtown to build on. There's several on Clay Street. There's also some further down Clay Street, eventually toward the river, there's vacant land that I don't know what the zoning is, but I could see it ending up being housing. And as far as what can the city do, we have the use of incentives. We've used tax incentives for businesses and for apartments. And so I think that we should offer incentives for people to build housing for home ownership, not just rental property. So I'm like to hear what you guys have to say on that.
All right, I saw Councilmember Toll, and then we'll go to Saber.
I'm not sure about the setback requirements because I know our house is less than 20 feet from the street. So does somebody on staff know what the setback requirements are?
Sarah, do you have any comments about setbacks?
Yes, setback requirements vary based on the zoning district. And Northgate Village is completely different in that the development there is governed by the planned unit development. So it's to a plan, not to a particular setback. So Councilmember Graves is correct about the setbacks for detached houses in R1B. It's 20 feet from the front and 20 feet from the rear, and there's a 5-foot interior side setback. I would say that the other thing to keep in mind is while our zoning ordinance establishes setbacks, we also have some requirements about distance between buildings in the building code for fire reasons.
Okay, the setback thing though, that's what I wanted to ask about because I know like with even the apartments around where we are, I thought that was just how we were going to be building more of an urban building where you're up on the street. So I'm assuming these homes right now aren't 20 feet back, at least when I walk around. Is there a reason why it would have changed from the existing distance?
You mean, is there a reason why existing homes would have a different setback than what's currently required?
Yeah, I think what Wes Graves was saying, sorry, Councilmember Graves was saying was that it's closer to the street now. And if they were to tear it down, it would have to move back farther than it is right now.
Well, I can't speak to individual property. You need to keep in mind that the avenues in particular, that development started in the 1920s and we adopted our first zoning ordinance in the late 1940s. So yes, there will absolutely be places around town where the existing development does not comply with the current requirements of the zoning ordinance. We consider those properties to be legal non-conforming. That happens anytime you change a development requirement in a zoning ordinance, you probably create some kind of legal non-conforming situation. And the ordinance lays out how you deal with that. But yes, I mean, not all of them will be legal non-conforming, but I'm sure that we have some.
Because if someone did knock it down and rebuild and they pushed it back farther than all the other homes, I would think that would look non-conforming.
The word non-conforming is in reference to not conforming to the current requirements.
Yeah,
of
no,
the
I
zoning
get it.
ordinance.
I'm just saying if somebody were, if I lived there and my neighbor knocked down a home and they rebuilt because prices are high, and he's right, that's something that might start happening. If they built 10 feet back below where I did from the street, that changes the neighborhood. You know, building up on the street is an urban plan. So I don't understand. I mean, I can't think of a safety reason why you'd have to build off of the sidewalk that far. Am I not? I mean, is it a safety concern?
We have safety concerns about the side yard setbacks because, you know, there are fire code reasons why you want to have some level of separation between separate buildings. We do have setback exceptions, and where we have lots of lots that are closer to the street, we do allow for variances in the setback requirement. That's why it's hard for me to say, oh yes, we have, in this block, all of these lots are not in compliance, because then you get into a lot of specific situations where there might be exceptions or other standards that apply. So, it's just a complicated
I totally get
topic.
the 5 feet in between, like the fire hazard of keeping the distance in between. That makes sense to me. But pushing it back farther off the sidewalk on any lot doesn't make, like, that doesn't, I can't see how that changes your fire safety. The distance in between, that makes sense. But off the street, like, I would be disappointed if my neighbors tore down their house and built off the street. That's not how our neighborhoods look. Any of our neighborhoods. Anyway, I guess that's something to dig into later.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Saber.
I'd like to jump back to the survey. After all the efforts that staff and others put into putting together that survey, the turnout was, depending on what population figures you use, like 5 to 7 10,000ths of a response. And some of those, as you said, were incomplete. So what that I think means is that there's a lot of burden on us to really get out and talk to people in our wards individually and start asking them these questions, because the survey doesn't do it. Right now, the survey is essentially useless. We're going to have to actually, each individual, get out there and do some of our own surveys and then come back together, hopefully very quickly, and add some of that information that is now totally missing, really. And I'd like to echo Wesley's comments about diversity in all kinds of ways, including construction and siding and colors and things like that in between houses is one of the things that makes North Kansas City so interesting. And I certainly wouldn't want to see suburbanization of the city going any further on the east side, on the west side, west of the interstate. But I would think we need to charge forward each individually, cover our wards, talk to people, and try to fill in all the missing gaps from the surveys that really didn't tell us anything. That's it.
Councilmember Roberts.
I had a bunch of notes here, but I think a lot of us covered it because the survey is so minimal. But the big things I took away were that most people feel the city's doing a pretty good job with development at this point. In particular, a lot of people talk about the complete streets. There's a lot of mentions of pushing forward on the streetcar initiative. And if you hang around the North Kansas City Neighbors group a lot, you can dig in a little bit further into what people really get upset about, I think, and what people really, they'll more likely jump in a comment section and put their 2 bits in there rather than fill out this very lengthy survey. So maybe when we do initial other surveys, maybe be more specific and a little shorter, because this survey was pretty dense. I think that's where you get people abandoning the surveys. But there was a lot of positives here. And for me, a lot of it's in the development side of things, and that people like where we're going, but that we need to, maybe put some ordinances like we've already spoke about in terms of keeping our character, both residential and when it comes to the business districts, in the same tone. But also, there's a few mentions of people in Ward 4 on the east side of 35 where they're lacking parks, they're lacking development, connectivity to, the bike lanes and things of that nature. And, some of that will change and is already in the master plan. But I think people need to be aware that those things are coming. The other thing I think is being conscientious with any development we do, from affordable housing to really holding developers responsible. I look at One North as an absolute utter failure. It's just this eyesore that I've been watching for 5+ years. And I think it's just personally atrocious. And some of these people think it's been okay. But we're all, you didn't take any any much time for us to post something online and ask, what do you think about the One North development? They're going to say grocery store, they're going to say entertainment. And when we look over there, we see really boring, a lot of blank space, and no ideas of where we're even going to take that to the future. So I think that's one thing we're going to hear more and more of. And I'm constantly reading those comments. I'm sure a lot of us are on there. But when we look at development, we need to hold these developers responsible. I mean, this has been years. Sure, we had a COVID break, but there's a lot of developments that were completed in COVID that look great and are now open and flourishing because they took the time and resources and a lot of people that were out of work and gave them jobs. Whereas we have a developer that did really jack during that entire time. I mean, projects that started before got finished, but nothing new started. And now we're sitting at a bunch of vacant lots. And my worry all the time, I think, and when I talk to neighbors, has been that we're going to have a development over there that's like all these failed developers have done over the years, like the Zona Rosas that go bankrupt, and we see people just abandoning these developments. So we need to make sure that when developers come in, when we choose them and we're approving these developments, that we're holding them accountable. We're making sure that there's ideas for affordable housing and, of course, family-friendly options, entertainment options. But most of all, we need to consider our small businesses. And that was mentioned a number of times in these very few submissions, that we need to keep and maintain our small businesses. And that's incredibly important, obviously, to me as a small business owner, but maintaining our aesthetic. When people talk about the character and the aesthetic of the city, it's that small town feel comes from being weird and quirky, and you only get that from small town businesses. So when we, I think, approach any of these developments and we want to keep that character, we want to keep that quirkiness, we have to really hold people accountable, especially if they're asking for some level of incentives. And that's kind of what I took away from this whole thing that wasn't covered already in the residentials. And of course, homeownership. I think a lot of people seem to appreciate the increase in density. Some people not so much. But at the end of the day, people want to see, at this point, we have enough apartments going up. Let's try to get some more, options for people to purchase properties.
Councilmember Clevenger.
Thank you. Again, a lot of it has been already covered. I just, am a little disappointed in the fact that the surveys, we got such a small response. I know it was a long survey, but if you're engaged and you want to give your opinion, you should fill it out. I think what a lot of people I've been hearing, especially on the neighborhood page and around the neighborhood, is they think that the developments as the apartments that are going in are going to maybe kill the small town feel or change the character of the neighborhood. Certainly we want to make sure that these developments, do fit in with North Kansas City, but I don't think, I'll try to explain to people that for our population, we need to increase our population if we want to support these quirky small town businesses that are here that are unique, and to possibly get a good grocery store. So that's, why we've been trying to do that. There has been a call for, other options, maybe condos or other ideas, and we just have to see what developers will bring and what they want to do. I agree with Councilmember Roberts on these developments that we do have to hold the developers accountable. I've been wondering lately about what's going on in One North and where we're at with it. And I don't know if that would be in an executive session or not, but I would like an update from the developer on what's going on and if what's coming up next, if we've got anything in the works. So for staff, if that could be arranged in the near future with the developer, I think would be a great idea. But pretty much everything else has been covered by other council members. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I saw Councilmember Smith and then Graves.
So a turn back to the home ownership discussion. The way I've looked at this, there's essentially two types of home ownership options. There's the single family, the more low density model. You can pack them about as tight as Northgate Village is in a new build, but if you're going to go that route, then you're looking at fairly low density. And then there's the condo route, which is going to be the higher density ownership that comes with its own set of issues with condo associations, with their fees that can get a little out of hand, as some of the ones in Briarcliff have been known to do. And then, it kind of thread the needle between is the row home, the row home model where they're sharing common walls, but they're individually owned. There's not necessarily an association. I think what we've looked at as these developments have been approved and put out for bid, there's a number of factors. The 23rd and Swift Superblock was part of a TIF or was part of a planned unit development that was being completed. 18th and Swift, that was pushing for more density. Being fully honest, that was part of the master plan that was handed down to this council from prior councils. And so we really need to take a hard look as a council, as this council, when we get into strategic planning and have some honest discussions about, do we want to, as Councilmember Graves suggested, do we want to incentivize a more low density single family or condo type developments? And if that's where we want to go, let's do it. If it's not what the council wants to do, then we need to figure out, are we going to look more toward continuing the density push or not? And we can't keep playing both sides of it. Then we've got everyone knows at this point the bowling alley is sold, but we don't know what's going on there. But we're also looking at a parcel that, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, is zoned commercial. What is it, C1?
It's zoned C3, which is general commercial. Okay,
so it's general commercial. If somebody has bought it, and we don't know yet, with the intent to build apartments there, we control that narrative because they would require rezoning. Is that correct?
It requires rezoning only if someone were going to propose a 100% residential project. If they were going to do residential above first floor commercial, that would be permitted in that zoning district by right.
Okay, so C3 permits residential over commercial. Okay.
It permits mixed use.
Mixed use. Okay. So if they're going to go straight residential apartments only, we can call that back if we so decide. But if it's a mixed use, then it would be automatically pushed through. Okay. Thank you for that. That's all I got on this one right now.
Councilmember Graves.
Okay, so I'm going to hit on a few things, just kind of rapid fire here. Councilmember Toll mentioned, why are there front setbacks? Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with parking. I think that they require parking space, which a lot of houses actually don't have driveways that are grandfathered in, but I think the new ones they do require. And I don't know if we have the ability to change setbacks, the front setback, to make building, perhaps tearing down a dilapidated 110-year-old bungalow and building a nice 2-story on that lot. Changing the setback requirements might be incentive to encourage a builder to do something like that. Going to Councilmember Roberts' comments, which I appreciate, regarding 1 North. There is a space in 1 North for a grocery store, and I do hear residents, that's all of us here, our constituents want a grocery store. We all know that loud and clear. We hear you residents that you want a grocery store. It's our job to make that happen. So whatever we need to do to work with the developer to get that at 1 North, that has to be a priority as far as we're concerned. This council group, I feel like we have a lot of unfinished business to take care of, including the bicycle path. And then also I want to throw this out there that's kind of a change of pace. We haven't talked about this yet, but let me pull it back up on the iPad. Vision theme number 5, local identity and culture. Something that drives me crazy as a real estate agent is our identity as Northtown. I call us Northtown. Are we NKC or are we Northtown? I would like us to have a brand, so to speak, as a town. And it drives me nuts, the fact that nothing matches. Like, these new Wayfinder signs do not match the city hall signs, do not match, we have painted crosswalks now that are a different color than like my city council name badge. Nothing matches. And I would like to have a theme, figure out what is our identity. And I don't think that's up to us as a city council to determine. I think we need to engage the community and figure out, who are we as a community? What is our brand? And I think we should be so specific to have colors picked out where these are the colors of North Kansas City, and even have a font to where all of our signs, everything matches. It drives me crazy that nothing is uniform. And I think we should brand ourselves, and that's important. So thank you.
I said someone was after him. Who was it? No, we'll go back. Councilmember Clark, you haven't got in yet. I'll let you.
Well, there's so much covered. I know we keep mentioning the grocery store, and Jesse, I'm glad you touched on the bowling. I was approached personally about what we did to close the bowling alley. And just so for everyone on record, if you're not on Facebook, it's a private ownership. We had nothing to do with that. We didn't vote for it to close. We were all surprised. This is how it goes. And when someone privately owns property, we don't have a direct say over what they do with that property. If they sell it, they have the choice. They have that right. And then they followed up that they had never been there. It's just kind of funny. So yes, that's not our job, is to squash businesses all over the place. We want everyone to flourish. I know we're pushing for the grocery store, and I know you guys in the other wards, this is finally a project that's in Ward 4. When I moved here, Ward 4 was simply Burger King and Sutherland's. And you guys took away my hardware store. It was very convenient for me. So it's not like it's so horrible to look at now. I walk my dogs there. I'm like curious, and I'm okay for us not to rush. I also will push back if it's just a grocery store. I'm going to give you a heads up. Like, I don't think my neighborhood just wants any grocery store that we can come up with to be slapped up in one north so we can say we did the grocery store thing. That's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for a grocery store. We're looking for Trader Joe's. Everybody wants a very specific grocery store, not just a whole other grocery store again. And as we all know, there's parameters around that, and there's a dense population that's needed in order to accomplish that. And I'm open to those things, but I'm not open to just any old grocery store we can dig up. Okay. My soapbox is done there. I am fine too in exploring the options of this whole zoning of setbacks and looking at people building on some of these properties of dilapidated homes where the foundation isn't salvageable. We all know that there's the opportunity, if it is salvageable, that you just kind of rebuild from there and you're grandfathered in. But if that's not the case, I'm in agreement of looking at that as an opportunity for home ownership and continuing that. I do appreciate the people that did write in comments and say that they appreciate the complete streets. And I also got the vibe that everybody on average was in the neutral to like, you guys decide and I'll be mad at you later, to agreeable and strongly agree. So thank you for that. And just know that we're here for everybody. And I'm happy for the people that are actually reaching out to Anna and I from our ward. We've actually got like a few people engaging with us. It's super exciting. And yes, I will also be pushing for, I know, Adam, you mentioned the things in Ward 4 that we're all going to be tied in soon. It's a part of the master plan. It's not quite a part of the master plan for us to have a park, a functioning, working, walkable park. And it's not a part of the master plan for us to have expanded sidewalks so that we can safely walk around in Ward 4. So that will be things that I want to bring to the attention. We want it bikeable and walkable, but that is a huge thing that I'll be bringing forward. That shouldn't be a huge thing. It should be an equitable thing that everybody can share in. Okay, I'm done.
Councilmember Toll.
I also wanted to get back to the survey, but first say that I was looking through the maps at the lots, and Sarah, I know they really put you on the spot there. Some of those homes are 20 feet off the street, and maybe it wouldn't be a change. I was just worried that we were changing, that if you wanted to build or continue to build, that we were changing our lots from urban lots to suburban lots, which would have been upsetting to me, but I can see that it's a case-by-case basis. So I know we didn't get a ton of feedback, but the feedback that we did get was really positive. And basically I had some people that had reached out to me, and I said, this is just one step in our process, and we're going to continue working so that we can work on our strategic plan going forward. So it was good in the feedback that we did get that, yeah, home ownership came up, but all of the other things we have rolling are really positive. And grocery stores, Councilmember Clark touched on this, grocery stores, streetcar, all of these things require people. Like, you need the density to support it. And that's why it's difficult to get a grocery store. So when we're looking at home ownership, I think along with what Councilmember Smith said, we have to be creative with what that may look like in the future to also achieve our goals for population, if those are still our goals. But they do affect, just for anybody that's thinking about it, your goals for population are going to affect who you can bring into the city as far as amenities.
I was going to, Councilmember Roberts, go ahead.
I'm just going to touch a couple things that were mentioned. Wes, we got the virtually urban, supremely suburban branding. Come on. Yeah, the entire city. Yeah, that is not a phrase or a tag or a motto. That is just two things put together. I 100% agree with Mr. Graves about re-identifying our brand. It's always been a struggle. As the KC Mo area continues to grow, you know, a new person coming in, you say North Kansas City, people always think that on a map that is like St. Joe, and it is not just across the river. So I think continuing to build on that identity and absolutely re-looking at what that virtually urban, supremely suburban horrible identification is, especially as we look to rebuild our online footprint. Another thing that I'd recently talked about is, as we look towards the future, creating more small business opportunities. Again, we don't have a lot of footprint, but we do have a lot of industrial areas. And if you bike around here, you'll see a lot of vacant ones or ones with little spots that are you know, have places to rent. Maybe there's a way for us to offer some small incentives for the people with warehouses to convert those into different types of businesses, so that small businesses, smaller businesses could come in, you know, retail, especially when we look at Swift long-term. What is Swift going to become, and how can we propose new developments and create, you know, these retail spaces or restaurant spaces or what have you, and you know, by and large, maybe possibly vacant spaces right now. So maybe that's something we can look at. And that's it. That's all I got.
So I'm just going to shift and kind of ask a more open-ended question. Was everybody okay with our current economic development policy? I mean, do you think we need to look at anything going forward? You look at a lot of projects that are being like the streetcar, you know, I'm guessing that will bring at some point, if we continue to have that conversation, a stronger desire to build more. Do you think we should look at our economic development incentive policy? Are there changes anyone would suggest? Councilmember Roberts.
I mean, I think we've all kind of suggested some different things in these surveys. I think we have a lot of good bones in there, but it's hard to be blanket with everything. And that's like one thing I'm learning, is that we need to be a little bit more flexible and not just have this one policy for everything. But like opportunities, like I just mentioned, for maybe somebody who has a blank space on Swift that would maybe possibly redevelop it, but they don't even know that the potential would be there. And maybe there's, you know, some form of that, you know, especially when we look long-term on those developments. But I think streetcar, I'd be hard pressed that, you know, I think the people that tell us not to work on it are people that don't think it's going to become a reality. So I think we need to turn those people, turn their attention to the positive side of things and find realistic ways to get it funded, to get it approved, and to, you know, really sit down and work with them. And we haven't had a meeting with them yet, so I don't really know what the scope is of that project. But I certainly think that when you look at redevelopment and incentives, that all goes hand in hand with how we're building the future of North Kansas City. So I think being a little bit more flexible in what we can offer people, certainly, and you know, I know in my ward, I get told over and over and over, and one thing that's high on my priorities is being able to offer affordable housing and rental properties for small businesses. I mean, you don't want to push a lot of unique, you know, you want to be an incubator for great ideas, and that's how places like the Crossroads, and now you're looking at the West Bottoms, that's how they become organically built. You know, you can try to make First Fridays all you want, but that doesn't happen overnight. That happens with slow, smart incubation. And I think that when you look at the Crossroads, they had a really strong sense of community and a strong sense of being able to work with individual businesses and to create unique spaces. And I think we have all these unique spaces. We just need to maybe go to these properties and these property owners and see what they envision their property being in the next 10 years, and maybe find a way to push them to redevelop their spaces that may not be using otherwise.
Yeah, thank you. No, I did just want to kind of kick around the idea, you know, as there is still potential room for, you know, more development, making sure that our policy is set now instead of trying to, you know, figure it out as that's all happening. One thing that's kind of interesting is you brought up small businesses. You know, we do have a minimum development investment of $3 million in our policy now to qualify for any sort of economic development incentive, which may, you know, not encourage some of those smaller, you know, spaces that you were talking about. So this maybe for staff or Matt Webster, was there a reason we set that at 3 million? Why is that the number?
Matt, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, Mayor, that was intentional. The notion was to avoid lots of small projects, and I wouldn't say that we were getting bombarded with small projects, but it was more of a, you know, sort of a time management and resource management issue. And I can't think of a reason other than that why you wouldn't, you know, be flexible on that. I would say this though, generally, in order for incentives to make sense, there does have to be a threshold in size for the project. And, you know, that's not a magic number. It's just that the cost of implementing the project, you know, hiring attorneys and so forth, can become burdensome on a small project. But there's no reason that we couldn't take a look at that, or we couldn't target that, you know, to something like an incubator or small shops. That is something we could look at.
That may be an interesting conversation for the future. You got to consider, you know, some sort of carve outs or additional incentives for the type of businesses, you know, Councilmember Roberts was discussing, or like you said, some sort of incubator. Councilmember Roberts.
Well, I was just going to say, like, so we have this in the last year, the amount of grants I've had to look into as a small business owner, and all these different, you know, things I was qualified for, was not qualified for, was astounding, but very frustrating a lot of times, because I'm in this weird kind of gray area that I'm not this huge business, but I'm not this small business, you know, micro business. So I do think that, especially when you see residents talk about bringing new opportunities here, a lot of the things that we look at around the country and city are unique properties, unique businesses. And to you know, you see someone like Iron District that is an incubator for a lot of restaurants and small businesses, but I think we can do that on a much larger scale. So maybe there is something in that, like, you know, $100,000 to $250,000 business range, where you find a lot of the retail, and you find a lot of the small entertainment and small retail or small restaurants, that maybe there is that some kind of incentive that we can look at that isn't, you know, cumbersome for us. But, you know, we're not talking $10,000, but we're talking a normally, you know, funded small business, but maybe there's an incentive to bring them here rather than, you know, Overland Park or Liberty or something like that, and to have more of that unique charm, which is in just about every survey here.
Oh, just to kind of tag along in our conversation tonight, and for everyone at home, we just discussed having our strategic plan. Now I'm going to get the month wrong. In August, we're going to be kicking off that conversation. So this is definitely good and helpful for all the council members to kind of have, you know, start engaging and get the wheels turning on, you know, what they want to discuss at that point too. Were there any further council member comments? Council member Columbia. Muted.
So I agree with Adam with trying to kind of give incentives to smaller businesses, because a lot of people, if you read some of the comments on the survey, are kind of alluding to the fact that they don't want to see chains come into North Kansas City. And then in addition to that, if, you know, we do get the streetcar come down to Burlington, which is ideally where we would see it, and kind of where we would see probably the newer development take place, I would say that there is some hesitancy in some of these comments about turning Burlington into what Armour kind of went through. Specifically because Burlington is way more car traffic heavy than Armour is, because it's connected to the bridge. And so I think we would have to really be careful with bringing the streetcar down there, because how is that going to affect traffic that does need to eventually get to the bridge? And for people that go from, you know, the Northland area and go down to Overland Park for work and vice versa coming home. So there was some hesitancy in some of the comments. And then I did want to talk about, it's towards the end of the survey where people kind of ranked their priorities. And if you look at the section where it says finance extraordinary costs for property redevelopment and or expansion, that seems to be an area that people are not in favor of. It's kind of either neutral or a low priority for most of the people who filled out the survey. So I don't know if that is because it was predominantly homeowners that filled this area, and they're kind of over the development of apartments in North Kansas City, and they're looking to move things towards condos or homes and pushing for home ownership. But I did want to point that out because that does make me question kind of where this particular group of people, which is not really heterogeneous because we said it was, 90% people who own their home in the area. So I don't know if that means that they're anti-new development or if they're just looking to see development outside of just more apartments coming to North Kansas City.
Thank you for your comments. Councilmember Smith.
Anna, thanks for the comments. I appreciate you digging through the meat of the bottom part of that survey. The one thing I would caution is doing any meaningful statistical analysis of what essentially amounts to 20 responses out of 5,000 or so, because the second lowest priority item was affordable housing if you go by the numbers in the survey. So it's just really hard to parse out. Plus, if I looked at this as somebody who doesn't really dig into the meat of how developments go, and I saw financing extraordinary portions of new developments, I would say, yeah, I don't want to pay for that either. That should be on the developer. But the definition of extraordinary items falls into a different kind of category. So it's just hard to do any sort of meaningful analysis of what we have. And that's frustrating because I was really hoping to get something like that out of this. To the mayor's question on the economic development incentive policy, one thing that's always confused me is why we publish our maximum tax abatement, why we put that number out publicly. I don't know if there's a statute that requires it, but in section 6B2, we throw out there publicly that we'll go up to 75% for the first 25 years, is it? And then another 37.5, first 10 at 75, and then 37.5% for the next 15. If I was a developer coming in, I'd probably find some way to make my numbers work to say I need 75% for the first 10 years and the maximum for the rest of the way. Now, some developers haven't done that, which I appreciate, but it seems like this would be more of an internal document that we would use to benchmark things against rather than saying, here you go, this is what we're willing to do, because it's kind of like putting your cards on the table before you make a bet in a game of poker. Sarah, is there a reason that we put those out publicly?
Actually, if you don't mind, sir, I'd like to call on Mr. Webster to speak to that.
Yeah, I can address that. Yes, that was intentional. If you don't do that, frankly, what happens is everybody comes in and asks for the statutory maximum, which is up to 100%, sometimes for a term of up to 25 years. It wasn't meant to be a minimum at all. It's not a floor, it's a ceiling. And the developers and their representatives do understand this is a maximum. At the time that we did it, it was also synchronized with Casey Moe, who had made some changes to their incentive policy in the same respect, trying to move it down. But that's, I would just say that that's the common practice. And if you don't do it, everybody just asks for more. So I think I view it as a positive thing, but I certainly see your point.
Okay. So this one, I guess, would be for Matt Webster. With Kansas City's change in policy really tying affordability more to the incentives, I mean, have you seen any real change going on in Kansas City and then developments people are pursuing?
Yeah, so what happened was, because of the way they crafted their deadline, they had a flood of applications that came in that didn't have to comply with the policy. I think at the moment, there's real question about how workable Kansas City's new policy is, and that remains to be seen. There's nothing wrong with trying to do affordable housing, but the devil really is in the details and how you implement it to get a good result that satisfies the city and also incentivizes developers to come in and do it. that's much more tricky. So the jury is still very much out. But I guess the good news is the council in Kansas City, Missouri identified it as a priority, and they were able to implement it. And so, so now they need to see whether they can make it work. Again, it's too early to know.
When was that effective date?
It became effective when it was passed, but what happened is sort of any project that the Economic Development Commission over there had been talking about was sort of grandfathered in. I can come back to you with the details of how all that works, but let's just say that there was anything in the pipeline, and I think they pretty broadly defined that was allowed to go through under the older rules.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, I had seen some of that. I think I'm fine on further details. I think there's something interesting to watch going forward, because I know affordability was something that.
Yeah, so I mean, the problem was in Kansas City, Missouri, that increasingly there were very high upscale projects. So, 1 light, 2 light, et cetera, that achieved very high rents, and then in just the equity involved in subsidizing projects like that. And that is a valid point of discussion, no question.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Is there any further council member comments? Councilmember Graves.
Yeah, a couple things real quick. I wanted to touch on going back to Councilmember Clark. You talked about briefly, establishing. Are you talking about like a park in your area, like Ward 4? So if you go to vision theme number 3, memorable destinations, establish memorable destinations to create authentic and diverse public spaces. So I think that would fit into vision theme 3. And then also you mentioned more walkability in your area, sidewalks and things of that nature, which I think would fit into vision theme number 4, which is safe multimodal network, enhancing the pedestrian scaled environment. And then also, I want to go on record for residents. I keep hearing people talking about Trader Joe's, and you guys realize, like, we cannot force a private company to build a grocery store in North Kansas City. So we are trying to attract a grocery store, but there's only so much we can do as far as selecting what grocery store wants to build here. And so I just want to throw that out there. I think that some people think that magically the city council can vote 5-3 and suddenly Trader Joe's will build a Trader Joe's at 1 North. And that's not how it works. And then also, maybe this is because of what I do for a living, but I cannot understand the affordable housing argument. So to me, and I'm just going to throw this out there, I'm probably the minority in this group, but when housing prices go up, that is because we are a high demand area. People are trying to move to North Kansas City, and it's creating multiple offers on properties. It's driving prices up. I actually think that's a good thing, because what's happening is people are fixing up houses, and furthermore, it's going to end up leading to what I was alluding to earlier, where there are people that they're going to start replacing. The house on your street that's like the worst house on your street might get bulldozed and become a super nice house. And I have no issue with that. So I am for quality over quantity when it comes to housing. I want to increase home ownership, and I'm not going to discriminate against high-end housing. If somebody wants to come here and develop property to compete with Briarcliff or to compete with One Light, things of that nature, I'm all for it. I want to bring people in here. So if there's high-end people that want to build expensive housing, whether it be condos or houses, I'm all for it. I don't understand why we have to focus on affordable housing. And I don't have the data right in front of me, but one reason why there's such a demand for housing in North Kansas City is we are a very affordable place to live. What I mean by that is you can buy a bungalow here for less than $200,000. There's a lot of starter homes here in North Kansas City. There's not enough, obviously. There's not enough supply to satisfy the demand. But the average sales price in Clay County, don't quote me on this, but it's like north of $280,000. And so the fact that you can buy houses here for under $200,000, which is like comparable to Crestview, that's why we're such a high demand area here. We have affordable housing. Affordable housing isn't the issue. It's the amount of housing that's the issue. And so that's my 2 cents on that. I think we need a diversity of housing, not just focusing and pigeonholing ourselves into affordable housing.
Councilmember Saber.
In terms of affordable housing, we have to remember that depending on what numbers you use, we're 75 to 80% rental housing. And so that figure of $200,000 housing purchase doesn't really impact the notion of affordable housing. What we need are, in fact, rental units that could be affordable. Condos and so forth can increase the home ownership slightly, but we're not going to really tilt that 80-20 or 75-25 split all that much because of the fact that we do have limited land available. And unless we're going to change to 10-story condos scattered all around, we're never going to get the kinds of density that some people have wanted for so long. We've got to realize reality and limitations and also the opportunities, and be aware of the fact that a lot of the attractiveness and development that we're seeing all around us is in some ways spillover from Kansas City, particularly downtown Kansas City. And we need to realize that some of that is to our advantage, but we also can't try to make North Kansas City something it isn't, which is a part of the metropolitan area, a part of, in fact, downtown Kansas City as an extension. And we need to further develop that. And one of the ways, of course, is to expand the utility of some of the not always used industrial areas on both sides, in fact, of Burlington, and to increase the connection to downtown Kansas City. And in terms of the existing plan, that's an existing plan we're dealing with. We don't have, you can use it as a template of some kind, but we don't have to follow that pattern exactly. We can rewrite it any way we want to. And it's something to keep in mind.
I certainly think we want to make sure people are able to stay in their house. So when you talk about home prices going up, what goes up with that is taxes. And, you know, so then my concern becomes, you know, our fixed income, our older individuals, how do we make sure they're able to age in place? How do we make sure they're able to stay in their house and afford repairs? And, you know, that's part of it too. We want it to go up, but, you know, you also, I think, want it to go up somewhat incrementally because, you know, if you go through if prices just go through the roof on everything, then everyone will be out of here before you know it. Sorry, everyone threw their hands up at once. I saw Councilmember Clevenger right before that. So I'll go with him and then go around.
Thanks. Yeah, with the housing and the real estate prices, it's a double-edged sword, like you said, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, we want to be the place where people want to come and want to live. On the affordable housing issue, you know, I've really studied this, and I'm on the National League of Cities subcommittee for affordable housing. And affordable housing is defined as, it's different in different areas. Affordable housing is if you're spending more than 30% of your income on rent or a house payment, then you've got some problems, you know, as far as not having affordable housing. We do have some units that are coming in on affordable housing. We've got some in the Gallery Lofts project that's underway and trying to get going if they'll ever stop raining. I know that some of these other apartment deals have not had some affordable housing. Affordable housing, I understand what Councilmember Graves is saying is having a great mix, and I think we need a diversity, but we do need to have some affordable housing due to the fact that, you know, you have a lot of workers here that are in the industrial or in the fast food industry or service industry that live in North Kansas City, and a lot of them are renters. And so I think having some options for people that are close to work, that can get to work, that are walkable, bikeable, is a good thing to have, but certainly not focusing on one certain niche, but having a diversity. But more affordable housing, I think, is at least something that we should consider when we're looking at some of these projects.
Councilmember Smith.
So this is a topic that's got, a lot of, I don't know, strong feelings on both sides, and I don't want to step on any toes. So I'll choose my words carefully. So the first thing, Mary, you brought up was, as property values go up, so do taxes, and that's that's been painfully obvious over the last couple of years, as Clay County has gone, 20 and I think another 12% this year on my personal properties. But with that comes a rise in property value and the equity that comes along with it. So as taxes go up, it's only a small increment of what your wealth has built up, and you have access to that through loan products. There's just not the argument that as a house becomes more valuable, your taxes go up and then you're going to be kicked out of the house because you can't pay the taxes. You will have access to that equity, and you can use that to pay the taxes if need be. It's a little bit of a deep topic right now to kind of go through that, but as property values go up, your wealth goes up as well, and you can generally afford those taxes. The other part is rental affordability, as Councilmember Safer was talking about. It's very difficult to conceive of, especially with the way building materials are and costs to build right now, how without a significant amount of public incentive, how affordable housing economically works out for somebody looking to build a new development. So if they've got to set aside X percentage of their units to be affordable, they're going to be looking for a pretty large public incentive. And we have to decide, what are we willing to, if at all, subsidize into that beyond what we're already doing for market rate apartments that people are frankly pretty angry about. So are we going to put extra money in on the affordable side, or are we going to try to seek federal programs or put that onto the developer where they have to go then seek the federal programs? It becomes a very large, complex situation. I know that the Gallery Lofts project has gone through so many variations of the low income housing tax credits and the Missouri tax credit, and they just fought tooth and nail to get it done. And every time they think they had it, some deadline would get kicked out. We'd have to go back to the table, and then council seemed angry with them for having to go back and ask for more time. We have to recognize that affordable housing, while desirable in a concept, is extremely difficult to implement well, especially in new builds, because the economics of it just are difficult. So if we're going to go that route, we need to maybe have a full work session with Matt Webster and figure out what our options are to make that happen, so that we can make an informed decision on if we're going to pursue it, and if it's something that we can even handle as far as handing out those public incentives. So I hear people asking for it. I know it's a big thing on Councilmember Saper's mind, and I respect that heavily. I just want to make sure it makes sense to do.
Oh, and just on that, the rising home prices. I mean, maybe it's financial education. I'm not sure that's what every American's doing, though. I don't think everyone's out there, capturing their equity at that. So,
they're definitely not.
I'm not trying to get in a back and forth with you on that. No. I definitely see the points you're making. I just don't know if that's the avenue everybody's taking. So there were more hands up before. Councilmember Toll, there we go.
Up here. Actually, what I was going to say rolls into Jesse's quite nicely. I also believe in affordable housing, and I believe a healthy community has a blend of all different kinds of people. Whether or not we can afford to do affordable housing, the one affordable project that we have, it doesn't have a tax abatement. The most incentives that we gave are to a higher end building. And if we're serious about affordable housing, then when we give away everything we can give away, we should have, 5% need to be affordable. Sometimes that's only 5 apartments, or that is how you can get it done. If you look at what we've done so far, and you look at the kickbacks that we've given, we haven't given the most kickbacks to the affordable housing. That's not how it's gone down. And the price of the land that was quoted in our special meeting, I had to double check, but that wasn't correct. It wasn't under $3. It was over $3.50. So, you know, saying, well, we can't even hardly do this with apartments that are market rate, it's going to be harder for affordable. We are actually subsidizing market rate apartments at a higher rate. So I just think you'd have to look at all of them individually. And if we are going to give, you know, 10-year full abatement, 10 more years partial abatement, then we should probably say it'd be great if you put 5 apartments in there that are affordable, not free, affordable, which usually just knocks down a couple $100s a month.
Council member, there we go, Smith.
Yep, and Lisa, I hear what you're saying, and I know that when they did the gallery lofts, I'm sure you're more aware of the details than most of us. They did the extra legwork to get the low-income housing tax credits and the Missouri tax credits, and explored all the programs out there, different lending programs, and they did the legwork. Most developers are not willing to put in that time and headache, and you know, I'm super proud of what they've accomplished there. The point I'm trying to make is that to build a private development, it takes equity and debt, and you got the whole financing stack that has to line up. And part of that was the incentive package that we were able to put together. We'll use 18th and Swift as an example. Without it, and there's the but-for test that Matt has talked to us about before. But for that incentive, it wouldn't have gone forward. And some can argue whether or not that's the case. But I do believe with the way the equity and the debt set out, I don't think that was going to happen without the incentive we gave them. For them to be able to include affordable units, there would have had to been more on top of that. We would have had to add to the stack, and it would have been a larger incentive piece, which we were already outside of policy. So it's making sure that we can still do that we can. And I understand we've given away big numbers to private developments that didn't have affordable, but I'm thinking we would have to give away bigger numbers unless they're willing to go the same route that Arco, or is it what's the name of the development company that Ryan's part of?
Yeah, you got it.
Arco. Yeah. So if they're not willing to go that route, either it's not going to happen, or we're going to have to give away even more as far as the tax abatements.
Yeah, but if you don't tie it in, because like I said, affordable doesn't mean free. If you don't tie that in to this big bundle that you're giving to them, you'll never know what could have happened. Sometimes that makes things happen. You know, if you had even, that's just my feeling. I love our community. I love our city. And I feel like a healthy community is a blend all over, not people that make this much money here and people that make that much money over there. I think a healthy community is a well-blended community, and we won't know if it can work out if we never demand it.
Councilmember Graves.
I want to throw a couple things out there. I appreciate your comments, Councilmember Toll. That's the main thing I love about North Kansas City is we're a melting pot, and that's makes us a really unique community in that we have a little bit of everybody mixed in here in Northtown. We need to work to make sure that doesn't go away. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. There's a couple things I want to point out on here regarding housing, what we're talking about, slightly shifting gears. Page 34 of our summary of the survey results, people talk about removing blight, rehabilitating deteriorating or obsolete properties, things of that nature. And I would like to hear from you guys if anybody has any ideas, including city staff, regarding what can we do about vacant properties? Like I live on Gentry Street. There's several vacant houses on my street that are owned by the same person. They're kind of littered around Northtown. We have vacant properties. And I think that actually is contributing somewhat to our housing situation, where we have people trying to buy houses that we don't have enough housing stock. Is there anything we can do about vacant properties? And then furthermore, there's also some vacant commercial property that is extremely important that I believe we need to address. And I don't know what we can do about this as a council. One off the top of my head is Denim and Diamonds. That's an important building. If you've lived in North Kansas City for any number of years, you know how important that location is. And and then furthermore, the elephant in the room is Armour and Swift. There's a vacant lot there, and I would like to know what is happening there. Is there anything we can do to help develop that property? Because that is right smack dab in the middle of our downtown. We have a vacant lot. And then also I just want to throw out there that something we need to focus on that's not really like a sexy thing to talk about. It's not fun and exciting, but we have issues with storm drainage and with roads, things of that nature. I go to the NKC Business Council meetings, and I've read a survey that was put out to the NKC Business Council. They did a survey to residents, and then they did a separate survey to people that own businesses here in Northtown. And business owners have concerns with issues that I really don't even hear talked about much in council meetings. We need, I was riding my bike. We all know it's been raining every day for 10 days and been riding my bike around, and there were like lakes in the middle of the streets in some areas. There's parts of town where, you're driving down 9 highway and you can hydroplane. You'll like drive right through the middle of a lake in the middle of the street, things of that nature. So we need to not lose track of real common things like that. We need to have good roads, good storm drainage. I don't want to name names, but I don't want to end up like certain areas surrounding North Kansas City that have really bad roads and look terrible. So we need to stay on top of that. Thank you.
Was there just some specific items on that list you're looking for answers on now? You fired away a lot really fast there.
What can we do about vacant property? We're all talking about adding housing. We have houses all over the place that are sitting here vacant. Is there something that we can do and be proactive instead of just sitting here waiting for something to happen? I think I've got 3 or 4 houses on my street, on my block of Gentry, that are worth a lot of money, and they're just sitting there vacant.
They're unoccupied, or they're just unoccupied, correct? That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, like literally no one lives there. I don't want to name names. I mean, there's people in our community that own houses. Some of them own dozens of houses that they don't even rent them out. They're literally just sitting there, and they're dilapidated, poor condition. They're worth a fortune, but they just sit there. Is there something that we can do?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Does staff have anything on that specific one? I know I got a couple. I know there's at least 1 or 2 maybe on Fayette, and I think there's also one on Erie that are the same. Same.
Well, I'll jump in, but if anybody else on staff has any ideas, it's very hard with a private property owner to force a private property owner to do something with their property if they don't care to do it. We do believe in private property rights in this country, and if for some reason a private property owner doesn't wish to do something to occupy their home, that is to a large degree their prerogative. Our job is to make sure that they maintain their property to an acceptable standard. But if they're doing that, I don't know that there is a whole lot that the city can do other than, offer to buy it at an exorbitant price, and then try to somehow become a private property residential owner, which is not the typical function of a government. So I would say that on the residential piece. And again, I'll turn it over to anybody else on the staff who would like to speak. With regard to the specific commercial property you mentioned, Denim and Diamonds, as I think many of you know, that is tied up in a very nasty private dispute that it is very difficult for government to involve itself in and try to intervene in. And that has been ongoing for years. And I think we'd all like to see that resolved so that something more useful can happen with that property. But as to what we can do, I think it's a very difficult thing to expect government to be able to make something happen there when the case is tied up in the courts. Lastly, with regard to the property at Armour and Swift, that is owned by NT Realty. Everybody knows it's the property that burned down a few years ago. Again, it is owned by a private entity, and unless the city council wants to talk about something like condemning the property and becoming the developer, which city staff would never recommend, it is up to the private property owner to make something happen with that property. And it is very difficult. I'm sorry, I don't have a positive answer for you, council member, but it is very difficult for government to be able to make something happen when it comes to private property ownership rights. If there's anybody else on staff, Matt, Sarah, who has any other thoughts they'd like to offer, please do.
I'll comment briefly. So I want to be clear that what I'm about to say, I'm not advocating for, but it is a tool that cities in Missouri commonly use. So the eminent domain statutes under state law are very powerful. And if the city council, because the prerogative lies with the council, chooses to use them, they can develop almost anything. But it's typically used very judiciously, very purposefully, and it's not something that's deployed very often. It frankly is not appropriate for residential neighborhoods, but for the repurposing of commercial property that is underutilized or in other ways impaired. It often is used, and Kansas City, Missouri has used it a number of times. Most commonly, you see that associated with tax increment financing. But aside from that, I agree with everything Eric said. It becomes a property rights issue, and that's just taken very seriously by people. So that's where you just have to be sure that there's a commonality of purpose and a good reason to do it.
Councilmember Clevenger.
Just a little more background on the lot at Armour and Swift, having been on the council. Again, we know who owns it. I believe if I remember correctly, after the building burned, they came to us with a plan for rebuilding the office building there. However, they did want a rather large abatement, like 100% for like 20 years, I think, or 25. At the time, the council just didn't think that was feasible for them to do. And so that's why the owner of the property took the insurance money for not rebuilding the settlement. And that's where the lot is right now. I know they've tried to sell it, and the lot has ingress egress issues. Another thing, as far as the city, we, as far as becoming a developer, just to note that anytime we take a property off the private rolls, then we get, and we are the owner of the property, that also loses the tax revenue on that property as well. So.
Councilmember Smith.
So keen eye on naming each of those properties, Councilmember Graves. The houses in particular, I know that there are a number of people who have tried to make offers, who have tried to reach out and have not gotten any sort of response. Most of those are commonly owned homes. And like Eric said, there's just very little we can do, but the private market is trying to solve that problem. It's just going to have to get, I guess, a higher number. The Denim and Diamonds one, I know a little deeper than most how nasty that got, or is still going on. And Matt, at this point, it's been closed for 7-8 years. It's ever since I got here. It closed down about 2 weeks after I moved here, I think, and it's nowhere closer to being open. And I've said this, I think, once or twice, that I would be willing to explore what an eminent domain move would look like with that one, because if nothing else, it might incentivize them to wrap things up. Whether we actually have to do the eminent domain move or have to move forward with it, and we could, but the threat of it, I think, might move the needle, because it is. I mean, Luke Bryan is on the front of that as like a 20-year-old, and he's holding a Miller Lite twist top bottle or something. It's so old and ridiculous that it's still that way. And then the lot at Armour and Swift is one that a lot of people talk about. There's been a fairly nasty exchange on North Kansas City Neighbors Facebook page about it. If I had the idea that they were sitting on that for no good reason, then I might be more upset about it. But they have been trying. They've put signs up. They've entertained offers. They've gone through a process with a developer who was going to put some, I believe it was either condos or upscale apartments there. But there's parking issues. There's ingress. There's egress. It's a very difficult parcel. And so if it was just sitting dead with no motion at all, with no effort put forth, then we might really need to start pushing that. But I really think that they're making an effort to try to get that. It's such a tricky parcel to do. So that's what's going on with those. And I don't know, Matt, what would it look like for the Denim and Diamond situation? Because it has gone on for a long, long time.
Well, I mean, just generally, there has to be, a reason for the city to move forward with the process, and it can be as simple as redevelopment, although sometimes it's other things in addition. But I agree completely with what Eric said. Having a plan and being sure that the plan that you're trying to execute is workable. That's really the first step. So I would say that's the threshold for even considering it. Do you have reason to believe that by doing it, you'll be able to advance the ball? Because as Eric pointed out, the city, and really no city is a developer, you have to go out and find private parties to partner with. And that's the hard thing. Finding an able partner, and then a partner whose interests are aligned with the city, and then a partner who can move quickly. And so those are the things to think about. But, what is the plan? How are we going to execute the plan? How will the plan be paid for? And then what is the provision for bringing in a developer? What does that process look like? Some discussion around those points, I think, would precede, any action.
Do you have any, literature, documents, or anything you could provide to us on how that process actually looks in practice? Because it's something
sure.
I've never.
Yeah, I could provide some case studies, because again, Kansas City over the last 30 years, they haven't done it so much recently, but for a period of time, they were engaged in those types of transactions, and there have been other jurisdictions as well. So we could find some case studies where people, identified an issue and then move forward to try and solve a problem that they identified.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So I guess kind of in the conversation earlier, if these buildings aren't being maintained, when does the city step in because it's a dangerous building? What threshold, where does that hit?
Sarah,
we are quite ways off from having any dangerous building cases with these properties. Dangerous buildings, for the most part, you're going to recognize that it's dangerous, that they're open to people and not, open to the elements. There is, something where we're concerned about an imminent collapse of a structure that would injure people. When you're talking about Denim and Diamonds, we have no knowledge of, that building being dangerous. Yeah, it's definitely deteriorating. Any building that's vacant and not well maintained deteriorates over time, but I think we're a ways off from it actually reaching the threshold of dangerous.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. I thought it was someone else. Councilmember Graves.
I actually do have knowledge of that building being dangerous and dilapidated. So have we ever inspected it recently? Because I've actually heard reports that the ceiling and roof are caving in.
Well, then someone would need to bring that to our attention, but we would also have to have reason to enter the property. We can't just enter property. Inspectors eventually become, an arm of the city in using the city's police powers. And we're just like the police, we would have to have an administrative search warrant to enter property where the property is closed and there's not someone there to invite us in.
All right. Councilmember Tull.
An idea for the vacant industrial areas would be bringing the streetcar over. So the development that you see along the streetcar line had similar issues. And number one, those people are paying taxes on that land every year, vacant property. And number two, those property values are going to go up. So I really do think, of course, we need the density to support it. All the people moving in, it's a piece of that. To bring the streetcar across could be the catalyst to turning over some of those properties close to Burlington.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing no other conversation, I want to thank everyone for the conversation tonight. Thank you for Councilmember Smith for bringing this forward early on in the process. I was glad we were able to have several rounds of this, and also make sure you remember all this when it comes to our strategic planning session. So with that, I guess I have adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Hey, let me toss one thing in real quick, knock it out. So yeah, I really had hoped to get more feedback on this. I think I've made that clear. I'm really disappointed with how the response came in, and I've tried to look at like what can we do to do better next time. We went through a couple rounds of revisions on the survey. We did, we've sent postcards and newsletters and emails and everything, and people keep missing them. So something has to give. And I don't know if that's having another public in-person meeting where people can come and speak on a specific topic again, but maybe we need to bring in some kind of consultant on how these questions are being asked, because we're not professionals of that at all, clearly, because we had the dropout rate of about 30% on this survey. So we really need to tighten up. If we do another survey, we need to tighten up how it's done so that we can get a better response rate, or we just need to abandon surveys altogether and go pound the pavement, as Mr. Saper said.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Gray said that early on. Definitely trying to better connect with our wards and holding meetings going forward. But go ahead, Councilmember Graves.
Yeah, real quick, Jesse hit on it. What I was going to say on this last sentence, guys, like, during this last election that just occurred, I went door to door around my ward with a notebook in my hand. And I literally just asked people, hey, what are you concerned with? What do you expect out of the city council? And I just shut up and listened and took notes. And then I would go home and upload the data that I took onto an Excel spreadsheet, which I still have access to. And I don't think these surveys work, you guys. I think that it's not fun. It's not easy, but go hit the pavement. Go talk to the people in your ward. I don't own a dog, but like Rita Pierce, she would walk her dog and talk to people. Anthony goes for walks every day, and I see him out talking to people. Just go talk to your neighbors, guys. These surveys, in my opinion, you can only get so much data from them. You can kind of get the gist of what people think, and I will also caution you strongly against listening to Facebook groups. It is not real life, I can assure you. The many of the people that are arguing with people on these Facebook groups do not live here, do not work here, have zero. They go to Chicken and Pickle once a month, so they join the NKC Facebook neighbors page and then sit there and argue with Councilmember Smith, and they have no vested interest in our community. So go knock on doors, go talk to people, go to an NKC Business Council lunch, talk to business owners, ask them, how can I help you? What do you expect from a city council member? And you will be shocked that what you hear in real life, face-to-face talking to people is nowhere close to what you're going to see on a Facebook page. That stuff is not realistic. So thank you all for your time. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Move to adjourn.
We'll try a motion to adjourn again.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
That looked like a majority. Opposed? No. All right, we're adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, bye.